right? Yeah.
It's kind of random, but on a multiple choice test, there was this term called machinists, and I thought it was referring to political bosses and political machinists. I forgot what it actually was like.
It was an actual position within workerdom, that a type of job that someone had was a machinist machining actual parts. Those types of people have started to kind of go the way of the dodo bird because of de-skilling and mechanization has made it so that more and more of the Anyway, so in our post Cold War era, so here's our very first clue that nobody knows exactly about what the most important things are of this era. You know what the clue is? Its name. They'll oftentimes refer to it as to what it's not. It's no longer the Cold War. Okay? We don't know exactly what the most important thing is, but we do know that last time, that Cold War era is over. So the fact that they kind of define things by what we aren't in anymore is kind of an important clue. And so basically, if you think about it, the end of the Cold War takes something in America that had made things so very, very simple. Okay? You were pro-commie or you were anti-commie. Which side are you on? Are you with them? Are you against? Where are you? But it's very easy to then divide the world up, right? But once you get rid of that simple division of all things on Earth, what you end up with is a Facebook status of, it's complicated, okay? It's not as easy to divide everything up. Instead of having this or that, we basically go all multipolar, okay, as far as what the conflicts are. So, our first kind of conflict that's going to be a huge thing on the American radar is going to be in a world that was becoming more globalized and in effect more the same. There was one section of the world that wasn't so much into it, and that was the Middle East. And so a conflict that was developing is basically Western economic, okay, systems and cultural systems globalizing, okay, basically clashing with, particularly in the Middle East, anti-Western Muslim and Arab regionalism. Okay, and by the way, is it exclusively in the Middle East that this conflict is going to take place? Absolutely not. But it was definitely particular to it. The second big thing, and it was almost as if it were like a light switch. You end the Cold War, and then all of a sudden, you have the rise of China. And China's ascent onto the map was quick. Basically, if you look at the gross domestic product of China, okay, so just basically here is way back in 1951, okay, kind of flat, and then all of a sudden, all right, as we get to the end of the Cold War, woo, okay, the production, the ability of China to produce, just between 2000 and 2008, it's going to quadruple. Now, I was in China in 2002, and when I was on a river cruise down the Yangtze River, okay, through an area known as the Three Gorges. It's a place you can no longer basically see the same views that I saw in 2002, because they built a massive dam on the Yangtze River. It's called the Three Gorges Dam. And one of the purposes of that dam was power. That in China there was a definite lack of ability to give electrical power to the people. Okay, this dam was to help change that, if that makes sense. Now, okay, China becomes a country that is going to be the great exporter of the world. They are going to export cheap consumer goods to whom in particular? The United States. And what you see here in the United States is the Walmartization of the United States, is that we still like consumer goods, but we can't afford the expensive ones anymore. So we go to Walmart and satisfy our craving for stuff by getting cheap stuff. And who was the one who's producing that for us and making the money so that we can buy it? China is. Additionally, during this time period, China is going to buy up 25% of America's outstanding debts. So I'm not sure you remember this, but remember back when I told you about dollar diplomacy and how the Taft administration was seeking to spread American influence throughout the globe by buying up debt to make it so that countries became somewhat economically dependent upon the United States? Okay? Get it? Do you see what just happened there? Okay? Is that, okay? Got dollar diplomacy. Okay? We also see that Europe will become more competitive with the United States economically, as European countries band together to form the European Economic Community, which as individual nations, European nations were far behind the United States economically, but together, okay, they were real competition. So this is it's no longer the United States and a bunch of also-rans. Okay, it's the United States with some serious competition coming up from behind. Does that make sense? So can you see these shifts? Can you see these changes? So this era, one name you could give it is this era of globalization. A time in which communications advances are going to make it so that financial markets in the world will become far more integrated. It used to be, okay, so we have a stock market in New York, okay, that's kind of on its own. A stock market in Britain that is kind of on its own. A stock market in Germany that was kind of on its own. A stock market in Hong Kong that was kind of on its own. But now these stock markets, because of the speed of communication, you can basically buy and sell on all of these things almost instantaneously, okay? In fact, not almost. Faster than instantaneously. Now, more than ever before, you can basically send all of your wealth across the globe like that. So what becomes extraordinarily important at this time is no longer one particular government as far as its economic regulations and policies, but instead international organizations. So one of the leaders worldwide in kind of creating a worldwide economic and trade structure is a group that is known as the Group of Eight. Okay, so Group of Eight, basically think of the biggest economies in the world, the United States, Japan, Germany, okay? Add to it Russia, but don't include China. China is not a member. And basically what this group did is it is going to kind of run international finance and trade They're the ones that basically control the International Monetary Fund. They're the ones that are basically going to control the World Bank. The International Monetary Fund, that's basically all international monies, okay, what they're worth and how they compare to one another. World Bank, that's lending and borrowing worldwide. They also will be the ones that basically oversee what is known as the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the trade rules. Now, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade has undergone a name change. It is now known as the WTO, or the World Trade Organization. It is some 150 nations across the world. What are the rules as far as how do we trade? How high is the tariff? What's fair as far as raising a tariff? What's unfair? What's allowed? What's not allowed? Okay? They basically are the referees to world trade. And note, it's not a country. It's an outside entity. The United States will feel the pressure, okay? Will feel the pressure of this increased globalization and competition from places like China, from places like the European Economic Community. And one of the things the United States does in reaction is we will help form what is known as the North American Free Trade Agreement, okay, or NAFTA, which basically creates a free trade zone between Mexico, the United States, and Canada. It's kind of our answer to the European Economic Community. So, what does this globalization do? Well, in this era, which corresponds with this conservative era in the United States, and so in this conservative era in the United States, how do we feel about regulations? Regulations are bad. So here it is, we're arriving in this era of globalization, just as we had taken this attitude that regulations can be impediments to big business, to trade, to making money. And so what we're doing is basically, A, here in the United States, we're getting rid of regulations. B, in the World Trade Organization, they're getting rid of all these regulations. They're making it so that trade is much more free. Trade is much less regulated. And you know what the advantage of that, people, is? The money. Lots and lots of people are making some serious coin. All right? It's a time where wealth, okay, particularly if you had wealth to begin with, okay, is skyrocketing. But there is also great risk in this globalization. Because what ends up happening is that if you integrate yourself with someone, okay, and then all of a sudden someone that you integrated with has like a crash in their economy, what happens? You have a crash. So, one of the big gains in this era was the European Economic Community, but is the European Economic Community extraordinarily happy right now? No, because they have what? Greece. Okay? Greece's economy is crashing, okay? And it's basically threatening to take down the entire European Economic Community with it. They're basically making a decision. Should we just let them cast them adrift? You don't get to play European Economic Community anymore. You also saw this in 2008. When in 2008, these worldwide deregulations and integrations had led to, well, we had a bad stock market economic situation at the same time that in Asia they had a bad economic situation. And what happens is these two things basically nearly blew up the entire world economy. I mean, we are literally this close to an absolute financial collapse worldwide because we were so interconnected. Does that make sense? Yeah. Well, so the initial reactions afterwards were re-regulation. And so there are several things that the Obama administration has been trying to do as far as putting in increased safeguards. But each minute we get past the crash, you get more and more people not remembering it, and it makes it increasingly difficult to pass regulations, if that makes sense. Yeah?
What's the point of the economic union? What are the
So basically it's creating, in effect, one big economy to in effect compete with America. The United States had this, does that make sense? So they want to be able to compete with the United States on a more equal footing, instead of the United States being able to pick off each one individually. Okay? The other major themes we see in this era are in our politics and a huge rise in partisanship in this era. Symbolically, this partisanship can be basically, if you go to the Republican Convention of 1992. In the Republican Convention of 1992, Patrick Buchanan, who had an unsuccessful run for president, but he was well known in Republican circles as a former speechwriter for Richard Nixon. And what Patrick Buchanan will talk about in this Republican convention is that basically what was happening in the United States was a culture war. A culture war for a culture war basically for the soul of America. Would the United States basically be a country that was moving more and more toward liberal values with no real religious base, more secular, or would it return to a more conservative set of values? Okay, so this was a contest that starts to develop in the 1990s. When you think of the contest in the 90s, however, think of continuity and change over time. Because in effect, the culture war in the 1990s is extraordinarily similar to the culture war that took place in the 1920s. Some of the battlegrounds are completely the same, such as traditional views of religion regarding such things as evolution. And even if it's not so much evolution, it can still be battles over things like, let's say, climate change. Some of the same battles. Also during the 1990s, we see a major change in the United States becoming, in effect, an increasingly plural society, an increasingly diverse society. You see, dating back to the Immigration Act of 1965, we had made a change in how we do the gatekeeping as far as who gets to come into the United States. In the Immigration Act of 1924, the National Origins Act, we used this kind of fake thing, the 1890 census and who lived in the United States in 1890 as a filter for who was allowed in the country and who was not. Well, in 1965, they abolished that. They still have quotas, but it's a more equitable quota for all countries across the world. The other thing that the Immigration Act of 1965 did is it favored keeping families together. So if you have a direct relative, okay, a relative that's an immediate family member that lives here in the United States, you would be given preference. You get to go to the front of the line as far as getting in. What this does is it creates our third major era of immigration that we're basically studying in this class. Remember, we had old immigration, that immigration period in the 1840s. It was the Germans and the Irish. And then we had new immigration, which was the Southern and Eastern European immigration, okay? Well, this third period, okay, not quite given a name yet, we'll call it modern immigration as for lack of a better term. What basically happens in this era is about 28 million immigrants enter the United States between 1970 and the year 2000. 7 million of this 28 came here illegally. Now, what does this do to the population of the United States? Well, let's take a case study of the state of California. By the year 2000, 26% of the people living in California, more than a quarter of the people living in the state of California, were foreign-born. What this is going to do is transform California into the first of a series of other states that it's going to happen to, where a state where there is no majority. Okay? It is becoming a minority state. In other words, no particular group will have a majority. Most of the immigrants that came into the United States in this new era came from either East Asia or Latin America. And by the year 2000, Latinos will become the largest minority group in all of the United States. What this will do is give us two different reactions. Okay? So there's going to be two different reactions to this increased pluralism and diversity in the United States. Now, the first reaction was in the 1990s, we get a concept that we call multiculturalism, where we start to celebrate the diversity, the differences that different people bring to the United States. Okay, so this was one of the outlooks that we started to develop in the 1990s. But there was another. Remember how I told you how in both of the other eras of immigration, okay, we had a reaction of nativism? The same thing happens in this third one. So the other reaction to this increased diversity, this change in American society, okay, was a backlash. Now the best example of that backlash was here in California. Okay? So the thing I was about to tell you about that happened in California are going to seem eerily familiar to you if you've been paying attention to things that are happening like today in Arizona. Okay? Much of what Arizona is doing now, California had already done back in the 1990s. So the backlash in California, the first example of it was, remember how here in California we have the ability to have citizens create laws. Remember the initiative system, where somebody has an idea, okay, they craft it into a law, they stand in front of Target, they try and get other people to support their idea, and finally when they get enough signatures, they send it to the Secretary of State of California. Secretary of State of California puts it on the ballot for California to vote on. And in the 1990s, Californians voted in favor of something known as Proposition 187. Now, what Proposition 187 did is it barred illegal immigrants from public school. So, yes?
What year did they?
Is the like 92, 93? Okay. What this did is it was an attempt to, in effect, make schools immigration patrol. That basically schools would have to, in effect, check the citizenship status of people enrolling in them. Okay, so now, by the way, most of this law was declared to be unconstitutional. And so we do not have to check immigration status to enroll people here at Pali High. But this was, in effect, obviously, a reaction to immigration in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I remember when 87 passed, there were huge demonstrations. It was back when I taught at Emerson Middle School. At that time, I think it was still Emerson Junior High. And basically, we had walkouts, we had huge marches. It was a huge reaction to the reaction, as it were. The other proposition that was passed that was also kind of considered a backlash at this time was Proposition 209. Proposition 209 did is it outlawed affirmative action in state employment, any hiring of new employees, or entry into colleges like the Cal States or the UC system. We also have that culture war, which Pat Buchanan kind of told us about. The big word that social conservatives used, or the set of words that social conservatives used at this time to kind of to just talk about it, was family values. A symbol of kind of the lack of family values. They attacked a fictional television character by the name of Murphy Brown. Murphy Brown was a professional woman who was going to have, yes, a child out of wedlock. Okay, and people believed that this was kind of just this ultimate symbol of the lack of reverence for the family. And so basically what conservatives will say is that what was causing these problems in America were A, liberal divorce laws that allowed the breakup of the family unit to happen so easily. An idea that had been around since FDR. In Social Security, there had been a section called Aid to Families with Dependent Children. What conservatives said is that this payment, this aid to families with dependent children, what it did is it encouraged women to have more babies so they could increase the amount of welfare money that they received. They also attacked the legality of abortion as basically decreasing the morality in American society, and argued that how could we fix this? Is stop the banning of religious education in American schools. Okay? Restore moral values. You saw at this time the formation of organizations promoting these ideas, such as Operation Rescue. Operation Rescue would stand outside abortion clinics and basically try and convince women that were attempting to get abortions from not going in to not getting an abortion. In Congress, in 1998, they will pass, and President Clinton will sign what was known as the Defense of Marriage Act. What the Defense of Marriage Act attempted to do was make it so that the national policy toward marriage, now basically states pretty much determine the definition of marriage or regulations concerning marriage within their boundaries. But what the Defense of Marriage Act did is it basically made it national policy that the definition of marriage was between a man and a woman. Okay? That was the legal definition federally. Okay? This law was declared unconstitutional in 2013. And what basically has been happening in recent years is state by state, there were battles to have gay marriage legal. Currently, at this very moment, by the way, this idea is up before the United States Supreme Court. When they declared the Defense of Marriage Act unconstitutional, what it did was basically it said that if somebody were legally married in a state, if they traveled to another state, that state could not undo the fact that they were married, but it wouldn't, no matter what their laws were. What is currently up before the court is, can a state still have it so that they will not allow there to be a gay marriage in their state? Okay, so one was equal protection, recognizing an out-of-state marriage. What is still before the courts is, can a state individually still not permit it? Yes?
How do states still do that?
Last count, I think it's 38 have some sort of protection. All right, so everybody just kind of take a breather right now. Okay, so what I've finished, sort of, are kind of some of the big themes. Can you kind of see what kind of the big themes are? I gave you some examples within those themes, but you could imagine that a question that isn't exactly what I told you might be asked. But if you use those themes as a filter, you should be able to get to a right answer. Those were the big themes of the era. Now what I'd like to do to kind of finish out is talk about the rise, or pardon me, rise maybe not be the best word, the election of 1992, and this guy by the name of William Jefferson Clinton. Okay? So, to understand this election, I have to take you back to last class period. Do you guys remember George Bush? George Bush had just successfully won a war in Iraq. So, somebody winning a war, does that usually help or hurt their popularity? Helps, okay? So he's kind of riding high. Everybody kind of with me on that? The second thing that was helping George Bush was communism failing. And so basically what George Bush is doing is he's kind of going on a worldwide bowing tour of yes, 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 we won the Cold War. Yes, you're welcome. Okay? this turns out to be kind of his Achilles heel. The Democrats are going to nominate a guy by the name of William Jefferson Clinton. Now, first thing about Clinton, he's a little bit different than Michael Dukakis in that he's a fighter. You accuse him of something, he hits you right back. Okay? He let no accusation just fester. He didn't allow anybody to talk anything about him without an immediate reaction. Now, by the way, there was a lot of things that he had to defend himself against. There were many rumors of extramarital affairs out there. And so he was constantly battling these allegations. Okay? But when he gets into the general election against George Bush, what he figures out is that Bush was playing the I'm the international president guy. And so what Clinton does is he says, well, what you should actually be caring about is what's happening here at home. And they literally had this slogan. It's the economy, stupid. Okay? What are you caring about this cult? You should be concerned with what's happening here at home. And so what Bill Clinton successfully does is he takes the election from being about the things that George Bush wanted it to be about to being about the economy. And on the economy, well, Bush wasn't quite as strong. Bush had recognized the huge increases in the deficit, okay? And he had authorized an increase in taxes. Well, the reason why this had become such a problem for him is that when he ran for president in 1988, he had made a promise. Read my lips. No new taxes. Yet taxes there were. The second thing that Clinton is able to capitalize on, and this is less actually him because he cannot actually really make a good case here, but women's groups could. It was a new issue, a new social issue that was kind of facing the United States that hadn't really made it to the big page before. You see, George Bush had nominated a guy by the name of Clarence Thomas to the United States Supreme Court. And Clarence Thomas was well on his way to being confirmed when a former colleague of Clarence Thomas, a woman by the name of Anita Hill, makes an allegation of sexual harassment. This reopened the hearings. Thomas still gets confirmed. But what it did is it opened up kind of this big issue that nobody had been talking about before. Sexual harassment in the workplace. And what became a slogan during the election, symbolic of this, George Bush doesn't get it. And if you would make this serious mistake of asking, what is it anyway? Well, you would be told, well, you don't get it either. And so what basically the Democrats start capitalizing on is the same thing that they tried to do back in 1984 when they ran Geraldine Ferraro. Was that the Republican Party was not the party in favor of women. Okay. Anyway, the Republicans will run George Bush, who kind of ran a lackluster campaign, largely because he kind of was making the assumption that he was going to win. And he didn't want to play down to battling, okay, in the elections, okay? And it actually ends up hurting him in the end. But ladies and gentlemen, it's not actually Clinton, okay, who truly makes it so that Clinton wins. It's a third party. Okay. In 1992, do you guys remember how I told you about the power of this new conservative coalition? Was that it was social conservatives, anti-communist conservatives, and economic conservatives? Well, one of the three groups rebels. The economic conservatives. A guy by the name of H. Ross Perot will basically make, do you guys remember that ski slope of a national debt thing that I showed you? How all of a sudden we go from, kind of this sort of gentle rise in national debt to, oh my God, pointy going upward national debt? Well, H. Ross Perot will say this is our problem. Our debt should not be this large. And he also just talked about how American competitiveness has gone away, that we're losing jobs overseas. And economic conservatives were hearing him and going, okay. So when it came to election day, you have this third person on the ballot. And what economic conservatives did is they sliced off mainly from the Republicans and voted for Perot. H. Ross Perot will get a larger share of the popular vote than any third-party candidate since Teddy Roosevelt. Okay? Now, he doesn't win any states, but he gets nearly 19% of the vote. And who does he mainly take the vote from? The Republicans. Because remember, they have their three-legged stool. In effect, take one of the legs away. Take the fiscals away. Does that make sense? And so Clinton, who actually got a lower percentage than Michael Dukakis did, okay, a smaller percentage of the vote than Michael Dukakis. But because of the third candidate, less is more. He wins in the Electoral College, okay? With 55% of eligible voters voting, over 100 million people voting, the most ever until 2008, okay? Clinton wins. And the Democrats take back both houses of Congress, and we will see the largest increase in the number of women, African Americans, Latinos, almost every group that had been very much underrepresented as far as Congress was concerned, saw new members, an increase in membership in 1992. It was a switching, it was one of those shifty elections, as it were. So one of my favorite little trivias, okay, in this election you had three candidates, all of them were left-handed. Clean or messy election looking here? Messy. Okay. Yes, sir.
Is there still like a solid South in elections today?
Well, today, not quite as solid. Obama made some major gains into the South in 2008. He didn't necessarily maintain them, however, in 2012. So the South is still considered more conservative, and the Republican Party is still the more conservative party. So there still is a tendency for the South to vote Republican. But Obama made the most serious gains in southern states than really any Democrat since actually Clinton, who was actually a Southerner. Clinton, as president, attempts to run what he called a third way. So what he did not want to be identified as is old school liberal. Okay? He doesn't want to be thought of like a Johnson or a Kennedy. Okay? What he attempts to be is far more centrist, basically trying to create a moderate to liberal coalition to face up to the conservative one. As a centrist, he was basically hawkish on defense. He was in favor of welfare reform. He was in favor of deregulation. Okay? He called himself a new Democrat. As president, one of the things he tried to do, however, more on the progressive side, was deal with health care. Now, there had been a call within the Democratic Party for a national health care system since Harry Truman. And what Clinton had recognized is that starting in the late 1980s, early 1990s, health care costs were disproportionately growing. So you have kind of normal inflation, normal costs going up, and then you had medical. Medical costs were already skyrocketing. And Clinton thought that we needed to bring this under control. And so he calls for national health care reform. He places in charge of this initiative his wife, Hillary Clinton, who attempts to basically put a national health care system into place. They are pummeled by the insurance industry, who once again characterize it as socialized medicine. And so kind of right off the bat, right out of the gate, Clinton-type reforms are failing. However, balance that with, okay, Clinton will recognize this other thing. One of the things that H. Ross Perot had kind of pointed out was this giant deficit. And what Clinton will do is by the end of his term in office, he will pass balanced budgets. And so remember that steep debt thing, okay? The giant slope, Scotty's run at Mammoth, steep, okay? You all of a sudden saw it flatten out, and then there was this tiny, itty bitty, but perceivable. We started to pay down the debt. We do that for about 3 good years. The main way they're able to do this, by the way, is do we have to have as many nukes and missiles and things like that? So a lot of this is balanced on defense. In foreign affairs, Clinton will basically, he's going to be there for the kind of the rise of Al-Qaeda. The United States had supported certain insurgents against the against the Soviet Union when they had tried to occupy Afghanistan. We helped pay for groups like the Mujahideen, and among the people we had been sending money to, okay, were people who ended up being the leaders in Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda will start targeting the United States as early as 1993. When a truck bomb is driven into the World Trade Center garage and it explodes. Hundreds and hundreds of people are injured. Okay. In 1998, Al-Qaeda will target American embassies in Kenya and Tanzania by bombing them. And what was considered to be, at the time, the most just outlandish attack by Al-Qaeda at the time was they actually will attack an American warship, the USS Cole. But in 1994, Clinton starts to hit upon hard times politically. In the 1994 elections, the Republicans will make significant gains, particularly under who will soon become the Speaker of the House, a guy by the name of Newt Gingrich. Gingrich will promise what he called a contract with America, which promoted conservative values like opposition to abortion, prayer in schools, okay, increased use of the death penalty. In 1998, this Republican House of Representatives will vote to impeach President Clinton, making him the second president to be impeached. Now, what the basis of the impeachment is that right after the election, back in '92, there had been allegations of financial improprieties by the Clintons. It surrounded a financial operation known as Whitewater, and so people jokingly called it Whitewater Gate. They appointed a special prosecutor to look into those financial dealings. But they gave this special prosecutor unusual latitude as far as what he was allowed to investigate. Well, in 1998, there were rumors that President Clinton was having an extramarital affair with a White House intern. So the special prosecutor, okay, Kenneth Starr, he's actually the head of the law school now at Pepperdine University. Kenneth Starr will bring President Clinton in for a deposition. And in that deposition, he will ask the president pointedly about this affair. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, what have I taught you about what is the go-to position of all politicians when accused of something? What do you say? Deny, deny, deny. Yes?
Is it illegal to have an affair?
No.
So why?
He lied under oath.
So this is the thing. Legally, President Clinton, had he owned up to it, this couldn't have been a thing.
But why?
So why did he ask, or why could he ask?
Yeah, like why could he or why did he?
Well, he did, kind of because he could, because he was given really no restrictions as far as what he could do and as far as his investigation. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he had unusual latitude as far as what his questioning and what he's allowed to ask about.
Mhm.
And basically, what he did is he asked a question which you probably should not have asked, right? But Clinton answered, no, he didn't. And there's the rub.
Mhm.
Asked a question he probably shouldn't have, answered in the way he did. He then basically committed a crime because he lied under oath. Did you see what happened there? Now, it has been one of those mind-boggling things for for the American public here, because was this something that was anybody's business? Well, a lot of people think no, it wasn't anybody's business. But then the president went off and denied it under oath, which is basically what the Congress will then say is you committed perjury. So we are impeaching you. Now, is that truly an impeachable offense, something like that? Well, that's something for y'all to judge. But I can say is that it is a little bit of a lowering of the bar. Usually when you want to impeach someone, it's because of something that violates the public trust. But on the flip side, did he commit a crime? Technically, yes. Yes.
When you say under the oath, you mean?
He had been sworn, do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help me God? And he said, yes.
Why
And
were,
then
why were they investigating?
they were investigating him for improper financial dealings in regard to a set of companies that went under the name of Whitewater. But when they gave this is your latitudes, this is what you can do and what you cannot do to the special prosecutor, they gave him a very wide berth. And since he had almost effectively no real limitations on what he could investigate, his shift over into this other thing was not technically illegal. Does that make sense? Anyway, Bill Clinton is not convicted, so therefore he is not removed from the presidency. But do you think this helps his legacy, his political standing, any of this stuff? Just before the presidential election of 2000. So now channel yourselves. Imagine you were the Democratic candidate in 2000. Do you want to stand really close to Bill Clinton with all the surrounding stuff? Or do you want to distance yourself? Okay? So that brings us to the ascendancy of George Walker Bush. In the election of 2000, the Democrats will run Vice President Al Gore. He will run against, Republican, a son of a Bush, George Walker Bush. Now, the basic lineup goes this way. You have Al Gore, who was kind of a liberal policy specialist. He had all sorts of plans on how to protect such things as Social Security. Go back and watch Saturday Night Live and look for the catchphrase "lockbox." Bush ran on a platform that he was a uniter, not a divider. that we had the beginning of this era of political attacks and things like that. Well, George Bush actually had a reputation in Texas of being someone who worked very well with the Democrats in Texas. That he worked across the aisle. And he's basically trying to work on this reputation of, hey, I can bring everybody together. Anyway, in the election, Al Gore, who had to kind of distance himself from Bill Clinton, still manages to win the popular vote. More people in America vote in favor of Al Gore than George Bush. But in a excruciatingly close election in Florida, Bush wins that state enough to clinch him the Electoral College and thus the presidency. It was so close, however, that the Democrats cried foul. That there had been all sorts of shenanigans that had been going on in Florida. And everything seemed to be breaking the Republicans' way. And interestingly enough, the governor of Florida, okay, was the brother of the guy running for president. Okay? Jeb Bush is governor, okay, and George Bush is running for president. Anyway, the Democrats believed that there was enough there to challenge the Florida result. They call for a recount. The Bush team, however, takes this to the United States Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court, voting straight according to ideology, the conservative justices voting in favor of Bush, the liberal justices voting in favor of Gore, split 5-4 and order a halt to the recount. In their opinion, they even state, do never use this case as a precedent for any further, future cases. Okay? George Bush immediately follows in the footsteps of Ronald Reagan and demands a massive tax cut. Now, there was something in this tax cut for everybody. Everybody saw a reduction in their taxes, but the more money you had, the bigger percentage you were getting back. The tax cut favored wealthy far more than poor. This happened, this cut, at the very same time that that thing that the Democrats had predicted, increasing health care costs, basically made it so that Medicare and Medicaid costs started spiraling out of control, and the cost of running government surges upward just as we make a cut in revenue. So everybody go, costs more, okay?
Costs more.
But less money in.
Less money.
And so what do we get back again? Debt. Deficit. The deficit is bad. Okay. Well, that very same year, Al-Qaeda will once again target the World Trade Center. 4 airplanes are hijacked. What Al-Qaeda will do is transform these airplanes effectively into missiles. They will crash 2 of these planes into the World Trade Center, eventually leading to their collapse. A 3rd will target the Pentagon. A 4th, the passengers on board that plane revolt against the hijackers. They stop it from hitting its intended target, we believe in Washington, D.C., but it crashes in Pennsylvania. Yes?
Wait, what do you mean they hijacked it?
So, people got on board with box cutters, basically took over the plane, okay?
Like citizens, like you, like they were.
They took over the plane. You were flying the plane, I have a box cutter to your neck, you are no longer in charge of the plane. Got it? Okay. Anyway. George Bush called for a war on terror, eventually targeting Al-Qaeda in the country of Afghanistan. He followed this, somewhat related, by attacking Iraq. We will now be running 2 major foreign wars, okay? And we had cut taxes, making our deficit even bigger. Hold. By 2002, the class of 2016 had arrived on Earth, ready to make history. Y'all can take it from here.